Hey everybody, happy 2024. We're here coming to you from our Come Cloud with Us community. I'm Chris Gill. This is my co-host Abdul Kazi. Um, we're excited to have you back for another, it's a year season, however we want to carve this up. But today we're bringing you the most awesome speaker. Um, Go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Abdul, for this opportunity. I am Sucheta. I'm a manager in healthcare IT, and I focus on, client infrastructure engineering. I specialize in modern management, enterprise mobility, leveraging Azure and Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager. I'm a 12 times Microsoft certified professional, and I like learning tech. And that's kind of my introduction. I do like sharing knowledge with tech enthusiasts, so feel free to reach out if you need anything.
Awesome.
So talk to us about, you said the healthcare. What are the challenges you're seeing in healthcare now? I know compliancy and regulations are fairly large up there.
Yeah, I think security is the most challenging, I would say, because with increasing cyber attacks, it's really you have to be on your toes to be abreast with what's latest in the technology and implement that. But again, you have to keep a right balance, right? You don't want to implement a lot of tools that are out there and then overload, and that's kind of impeding towards your security or making your lives difficult to manage your environments. So I think that's kind of the most difficult situation where you want to keep a balance in between how secure you want to make your environment and how best you want to manage it.
Yeah, and then talking about balance, you said you are 12x certified. So talk to us about your journey. How did you get into IT and how are you keeping up? Because that's quite a bit.
Yeah, so I got into IT. That was kind of a no-brainer because I studied in electronics engineering, but I was more aligned or inclined towards computers. Had a couple of those, topics as part of my coursework. So I got into, Dell Technologies as my first job, where we started out with a Windows installer scenario where and Microsoft had just come out at that time with like MSI installation methods, and they had SCCM, which was then called SMS. So I worked on those technologies, and from there I just expanded my technical expertise into other areas, and currently more into desktop engineering and endpoint management, and obviously Azure, because that's where you would centrally manage your resources, workstations, devices, and even apps and users. So yeah, that's kind of where I have been leaning more towards in my tech career. But as far as the 12 times Microsoft certification goes, um, to keep up with the ever evolving technology, I found the need to keep learning. And because I was learning new things and I was making real strides with trying to understand most aspects of what I do in my work role, it was easy for me to go sit for the certification exams and to get certified. So instead of just having the knowledge, I would also want a shiny little badge, the badges that they give out for certification. So I took advantage of that. And it wasn't an easy journey, though, because, studying for something and actually sitting for the exam are two different things.
Mhm.
The exam may sometimes may get more involved, where you have lab scenarios and things like that, where you actually have to do hands-on practice before you sit for the tests. So and then doing like all these different 12 certifications, I think it took me almost like 3 years. So it was a journey, and I haven't stopped. I'm looking forward to doing more as well.
That's great. That's awesome, actually. Yeah, that's amazing.
I feel like
So
it's a similar path where it's like just that desire, that passion kind of leads the way. So it's good to hear.
Thank
with
you.
that being said, we'll jump into your presentation. So uh, the floor is all yours.
All right, thank you so much. And hi, everyone. I am Sucheta, like I introduced myself already. Welcome to my session. And today our discussion centers around the Microsoft Graph Explorer. We will delve into understanding what Graph Explorer is and uncover its advantages for a wide range of users. which includes developers, M365 admins, as well as Azure or Intune admins. We'll explore the Graph Explorer to find out its capabilities, learn what all you can do with it, and how you can leverage it to build solutions. And that's me. I did mention I work in healthcare IT, and my focus has always been on endpoint engineering, using SCCM, which now we call as MECM, which is Intune on the cloud side in Azure. But Azure is what I leverage in my job role. And my socials are listed here if you'd like to reach out. With that, let's look at the agenda. So to set the stage for different expertise level of audience we may have here, I'll first do a quick primer on what Graph is. That will help you understand it better. So as we get into Graph Explorer towards the second half of the session. We'll take Graph a little bit further to understand on a high level the capabilities of the Graph API, the various services and endpoints that Graph exposes, the resources and data that can be accessed with Graph, why would you use it, and how is it beneficial to you as a developer or as an admin. So Graph obviously is beneficial to both developers and admins, and either can leverage it to build solutions. And then with that foundation, when we review tools for interacting with Graph, we'll get to the crux and then dive deeper into the Graph Explorer to learn its capabilities, find out how you will use it to query and obtain responses from the different services and endpoints that Graph exposes. Post that, we will get to the demo, which I know most people are waiting for. In the demo, I will traverse various aspects of the Graph Explorer to help you comprehend how to use it. And we'll do some hands-on querying as well into M365 data using the Graph Explorer tool, which leverages the Graph API. So I'll show all of that. And continuing on after the demo, I'll highlight some rich resources for you to take away. Lastly, we'll discuss what you can do next with the understanding gained in this session. And of course, feel free to ask questions. We can do the questions later, and that should be fine as well. All right, so let's get started and look at what is Graph. So Microsoft Graph is a gateway to data and intelligence of M365 suite of products and services. It basically is a unified endpoint, a REST API that you can use to access and interact with data in M365. Now, this single unified API is the graph.microsoft.com that you see on the slide. And as you can see in the figure, the Graph API connects to M365, encompassing Office 365, Windows 10, Windows 11 services, enterprise mobility, security, and all of that. So Graph exposes data sets for all these different services, allowing access to a wide range of data stored across them. You can leverage data accessed from these services to build or enhance applications or to automate the administration of your cloud services. All of this using the Graph API requests. So now Graph exposes REST APIs and provides client libraries, SDKs, which you'd use to build apps that support M365 scenarios. And let's look at what Graph exposes, right? So Graph exposes data on M365 core services, which include Calendar, Excel, OneDrive, Outlook, Teams. And it also exposes data from enterprise mobility and security services, which includes threat protection, Entra ID, and Intune. And Intune is what I mentioned earlier. That's the platform that I typically work in. Those who are not aware of Intune, it is an Azure-based endpoint management solution. Intune simplifies device and app management across devices, including mobile, desktops, laptops, virtual endpoints. It manages user access to organizational resources. It also manages user access to resources. which are, on the user's devices. Basically, it is used to centrally manage organizational devices. So yeah, Graph also exposes data from Intune, which is helpful to admins. And in conjunction to that, Graph helps access Windows services, Windows devices, like I mentioned. And lastly, Graph provides access to the Dynamics 365 Business Central services. So there are a number of Microsoft Cloud services that talk to Graph, and we can leverage interacting with them through the API for various use cases. Okay, so Graph exposes the services that we saw on the earlier slide, but how is that helpful, right? What are the benefits of Graph? Why would you use Graph? How would you use it? And what kind of data is that you would retrieve from the M365 services to use in your solutions? Let's answer these questions, starting with the benefits. So Graph provides developers and admins in Azure access to data located in the various M365 services without having to learn about how the individual services work. Prior to Graph, there were many disconnected cloud services. Authentication was inconsistent. There were various APIs that had to be learned. And developers, I think, had a hard time. For instance, Exchange Online, email and calendar had its own API, outlook.office.com. Similarly, I think OneDrive for business had its own API. But with Graph, a single API connects your apps to M365 data and services. We have just one API or one endpoint to account for at this time. And the Graph API includes APIs from services such as SharePoint, Outlook, or Exchange. With Graph, things are interconnected, so that's helpful. And security is a critical part of any organization, and Graph provides that built-in security to control access to services. But again, how do you leverage Graph, right? So the Graph API is a query language for data in M365. You'll write queries such as getting a list of teams that a user has joined, or you'll create a new user in Entra ID if you're automating the administration process with Graph. In addition to making direct calls to the Microsoft Graph REST API, you can use the Graph SDK, the client libraries. Those will simplify the process of calling the APIs and aid in the development of your applications and solutions. And finally, on this slide, let's look at the type of data we're talking about. So Graph services are based on users and groups, as you can view in the figures on the right. Another way of looking at what Graph has to offer is by looking at the resources and the types of data that it exposes. Graph gives us the ability to access and interact with resources such as devices, tasks, files, mail, and conversations, and much more of either of a single user or of a user group. So that's kind of what Graph encompasses. Now, let's finish up the overview of Graph with looking into the type of solutions we can build by using Graph. With Graph, you can enhance new or existing applications and automate workflows. You can also increase efficiency and productivity by tapping into data that employees need. You can include this type of data and intelligence in your own custom apps by calling the API. And in addition to making direct calls, like I mentioned earlier, you could use the SDKs. You can make API calls using your chosen programming language and framework. An example would be a JavaScript application. You register it in Entra ID and make your Graph call. And I'll talk more about the app registration in upcoming slides and also in the demo. So both developers and admins use Graph to build solutions. First, we'll look at a few development-based examples here. Now, you could be configuring a .NET or a JavaScript application, for instance, to retrieve M365 data. You could build an app that looks at a user's next meeting and helps them prepare for it by providing profile information for attendees or including their job titles and managers, as well as information about the latest documents they are working on and people they are collaborating with. So there's a lot that you can do. And part of the solution you would implement in the scenario is that with the Graph API, you'll review the meeting invite, you'll get the email addresses of the meeting attendees, you'll look them up individually as a user in Entra ID, and you'll pull their profile information for your app to return. Then you could also build solutions to enhance user experience. You could retrieve information such as the user's photo or chat or files and pull that data into apps that users work with every day. So that helps users. And about implementing productivity and collaboration, or even people and workspace intelligence, I can take another example. So say you're developing an app to get the history of interactions between customers and salespeople and reviewing files related to the customer to enable those salespeople to work with customers effectively. You can use the Graph API to call to get all the customer interaction data and the application needs. For better productivity and collaboration, you as a developer could enhance the app and add a chatbot, that can schedule meetings between colleagues and customers, check calendar availability, remind salespeople about the to-do list for the day, and things like that. Also, what enhances people and workspace intelligence is that using Graph, you get trending, shared, and frequently used files across the organization. So you could make such relevant content more accessible to users. And that was more about the development scenarios. However, with regard to better administration and implementing automation, which kind of aligns more with our Intune admins, Azure M365 admins, one of the areas Graph can help you out is, say, identity and access management. Graph can be used to connect to Entra services and also automate administrative workflows. Processes like profile maintenance, employment or employee onboarding or termination, tracking assignments, those can be automated. Say every time a new employee is hired, their profile can be auto-generated in Entra ID. Also, you could get them added to the right team in Microsoft Teams. You may need to get a list of all the different devices, say laptops and phones that all the users in a specific group have or work with. So these kind of solutions are different examples where you can script for automation by leveraging Graph. And use of PowerShell scripts is most common for such use cases. You can leverage the Graph PowerShell modules that are available. So yeah, I can go on with some more examples, but I think that pretty much should give you an idea. And with that understanding of Graph and its potential uses, you might be wondering what would be the most effective way to interact with Graph, right? So here's the answer. That is where Graph Explorer truly shines, which is our topic of interest today. So the Graph Explorer serves as an intuitive and user-friendly platform for engaging with Microsoft Graph. It is ideal for a range of users, not limited just to the developers, but also to admins. Additionally, developers have the option to use Postman, another versatile tool for more complex or customized interactions with Graph. But since our topic of focus today is the Explorer, let's start diving into the Graph Explorer and explore its capabilities. All right. So simply put, Graph Explorer is a playground to make Graph API requests and obtain responses and basically try things out. It is an online tool, so you don't need to install anything to be able to use it. Graph Explorer is where you can start to get familiar with the Graph API, easily query it, test the queries, see how it works. Basically, it helps for anyone starting out new, or even in regular environments where you want to test things out in a test or a dev environment rather than trying things in prod. The tool is very helpful to perform ad hoc queries and validate whether you're getting the right data, regardless of whether you're scripting or whether you're doing programming. It's an easy tool to get started with. And what you see in the figure here is the web-based Graph Explorer interface. While this is just a preview, we'll shortly get hands-on in the tool and run various queries during the demo after a couple of slides. All right, so let's quickly look into the capabilities of Explorer. So by using this tool, you can learn how to make calls, get that data you need, and get an opportunity to actually prototype before pulling the data into your custom applications or before you manipulate any data in the tenant. I think that's really helpful. It supports various HTTP methods, which are fundamental to RESTful services. Now, there is a sign-in button, but you don't necessarily have to sign in. You can play around in Graph Explorer by running queries against the demo tenant. If you don't sign in, that is, but your experience will be limited. And I will show that as well as I demo. Out of the box, without logging in, you get like sample data, but if you do sign in, you can get real data that you have in your test or dev tenant. But you can use the Explorer to retrieve organizational data, see the types of data that's available, and learn how you can call into the Graph API. This is in most cases done by logging into the Graph Explorer with an account in a dev tenant. You could use something like a free developer tenant. And I'll talk more about the free developer tenant right after the demo as part of the resources. So yeah, the Explorer is mainly suited for development scenarios, non-production use cases. And like I said, it is equally beneficial to admins as it is to developers, because they would want to explore the capabilities of Graph and leverage Graph to build apps and to build automation. All right, so here are some getting started guidelines. After reviewing these, we'll jump right into the demo to see things in action. But let's understand some basic things before getting into the demo so you can follow better during the demo. Now, there are multiple entry points to get into Graph Explorer, including the links listed on the slide. I'll show you the few different ways you can get to the Explorer. But talking of sign-in, consent, app registration, access tokens, let's review them all first. So as I referred to on a previous slide, you can explore without signing in. But to play around with your test data, you would sign in with an account in the tenant you would like to work with. The first time you sign in to Graph Explorer, it is going to ask you for consent. It's going to say like, can Graph Explorer access all of this data on my behalf? You say yes and you log in, but that doesn't give you access to all of the capabilities of Graph. It's only a small subset. And if you want to be able to access more capabilities on the Graph, you need to go and provide additional consent within the Graph Explorer. And I'll show you that as well in the demo. But the consent is very granular, and you consent as and how it's needed while you run your queries. In most cases, you'll run into a situation where you try to run a query, but it will complain about lack of permissions, something like you need to consent to the permissions on the Modify Permissions tab. This happens if you try to run a command or API to which you don't have enough permission. So that's where you would actually go to Modify Permissions tab, and it will show you what all you need to provide consent to. In some cases, even admin consent is required, but we'll see all of that. However, as far as app registration goes, now, before your app can get an access token from the Microsoft Identity Platform, it must be registered in the Azure portal. Registration integrates your app with the identity platform, which is Entra ID, and it establishes the information that it uses to get access tokens. The app will use the tokens to make your Graph API calls, and that is how it will access data. The app makes an authorization request by attaching the access token as a bearer token to the authorization header in your HTTP API request. Now, this holds true for any app that you would build, but for Graph Explorer specifically, it is just like any other app, that is using the Graph API, and it is protected by Entra ID. It does need a token from Entra ID for authentication, and it must be registered in Azure. However, that registration part is taken care of automatically for you when you start to consent to stuff and run queries in Graph Explorer. So you don't have to specifically go in and do app registration for the Graph Explorer itself. That should be done for you automatically. All right, so with that, let's review the query syntax and the query process in the Explorer. For building a query, you select the method from the HTTP verb list that can help you modify your HTTP request to be get, post, put, patch, or delete, quite similar to how you do CRUD. You would do get if you need to find the resource that you're actually wanting to query. If you want to pull data from your M365 platform, if you're retrieving information, that's where get comes into picture. Post is when you craft a JSON payload of what you want to create. This is when you would actually create a new entity within your tenant. Patch is if you want to just update something, one attribute, say, for instance, you craft a payload in such a way that in your request, you send only the attributes you want to update, and you're done. Put is a little bit of a mix because it completely overrides existing data. It doesn't really care what was there before, whether you send as the payload, or basically whatever you send in the payload, that it will submit to the server, and your data will get overwritten. So that's basically what put would do. And then delete is simple. You can use it when you want to remove or delete something. So those are mainly the methods. But then we have the API version. So there's a version dropdown which lets you select what version you want to use. It helps you choose the version of the Graph API that you want to the call that you want to make, which is version 1.0 versus beta. Those are the two versions, or those are the two APIs, I would say. Now you should use version 1.0 for your production use cases. It has features that are generally available and is reliable. In beta, you'll find more capabilities. Of course, it has advantages. It has the same resources as the version 1.0, but it also has previews of new features that are being added. And things are constantly being developed, right? So you will always see something new coming into the beta API. So that's why beta is not recommended for production use. If you are looking to try out any new services, then there's a chance that you may find them in beta if it has been released for preview. Now, the version you choose, whether 1.0 or beta, that determines which resources and operations are available. And we will be exploring that as well in the demo. And then you finish up writing your HTTP query using parameters as you need, select, filter, or top 5, for instance. You can use headers for additional metadata of the message that you want to send, or the request that you want to send, and then you run the query. If it errors asking for additional consent to any other granular resources, then you would do that. You would grant the consent, you would rerun your query, and then you get your response in the Graph Explorer tool itself. And then the Graph Explorer tool also includes helpful features such as code snippets, C#, for instance, or Java, JavaScript, PowerShell. It does provide you samples of those code snippets. It has the Microsoft Graph Toolkit integrated, as well as adaptive cards. These offer additional benefits to developers mainly. So basically, code snippets, it's adaptive. If you're querying an object, it will show you how you could take that as a code snippet, import it to C#, JavaScript, or Java. Then the toolkit component shows sample code and output, for leveraging the Graph toolkit UI library. It provides an easy way, for instance, in an app that can use web components to embed information from Graph. And the adaptive cards, they show sample code. Output for using adaptive cards is, if you're writing things like bots, you have a bot for Teams, for instance, then you can make use of those adaptive cards. All right, so that's that. And then demo time. So I'll get into the demo here. And I'm going to start the demo on my other screen. And I'll start with the Graph demo, and then we'll slide into Graph Explorer. All right, so let me do that. Okay, so Abdul and Chris still able to see my screen and can go ahead with the demo, right?
We're not able to see your screen, so if you want to share that again.
Oh, you're not? Okay. All right, so I'll do that.
Yeah, no worries.
I'm glad I asked. All right, how about now?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect.
There we go. Perfect.
All right. So graph.microsoft.com is the API or is the page where you would go looking for Graph. And let's explore this a little bit. And from there, I'll take it further to the Graph Explorer. So like this page, it actually gives a lot of information about the Graph API itself. At the top here, you can see there's a lot of exploration that you can do. It gives you direct connections to your Graph REST API. You can click into that. Gives you more resources here to try out things. And then your Graph connectors, it tells you what those are, the Graph Data Connect, and I can explain that here real quick. So if you're looking to bring in data from external platforms into Graph, then you use Graph connectors. Graph Data Connect is mostly for taking information out of Graph into Azure. So like say for analysis. So you could use Data Connect and put your large data files into say Azure Data Lake. So that's where the Data Connect comes into picture. And then this is where you can get an entry point into the Graph Explorer, but I'll wait on that for a minute here. Then there are documents, basically for Graph, as well as it explains other things related to the API. So you can find rich resources here. It has links to your SDKs that you would need. Again, another entry point into Graph right here, the Explorer. This also talks about quick start. If you're looking for a quick start into the Graph, you want to explore what the API does and how you can build your solutions real quick. And then the Graph Toolkit. So it has everything in one place here on this page. I always find the documentations very helpful. And then the API, where you have a lot of your API reference. Quick start, again, I'll get into that. So quick start is interesting. This can help developers because this is going to help you get up and running in 3 minutes. That's what it says. So you can try out, things here. I feel this is really important and something you should try out before you get further into Graph. And then again, your SDKs, change log for what's coming, what's changed in graph, then the known issues. This is all very helpful. You have a lot of opportunities here to learn from, different podcasts, samples, trainings, all of that is available. And then the developer program. This is what I talked about earlier. This is the developer tenant that you can create from here, but I'll park that for some time. We'll look at it right after the demo. So that, and then on this page, again, if you scroll down, again, another entry point into Graph. It says you can try Graph Explorer right from here. But then this also has more documentation about the Explorer, the Graph itself. So yes, there's definitely a lot that Microsoft has already put out there to help you succeed in your Graph API utilization. So definitely make use of these things. Okay, so if I were to click on this, I would land on the Graph Explorer page, which I already have open here. So I'll go right into there. But again, you can also do aka.ms/ge and come back to the same page. And this is our Graph Explorer interface. And here again, I will start with the top ribbon, which I think is mostly similar to what we saw on the graph page. So I won't go over that again. However, let me give a quick overview, and then we can get into the depth here. So if you look, this kind of is a good web-based tool, which you can use to directly run queries right from here. Now, this is my directory, which I haven't really renamed. It is just named as a default directory, but I have signed in, and that's why you see that. But like I said, you could play around in Graph Explorer even without signing in. And towards the end of the demo, I'll sign out and I'll show you the difference. But for now, as an overview, if you look here on the left side, we have this section where it actually gives you a lot of samples. So sample queries to try with. You can run these queries and you can see what happens, what it does. You can see the responses and even the requests, because you want to also be able to form your own queries, put the right request body, the right request headers if that's needed, and then modify permissions that I was talking about, the granular permissions that you need. And we'll do all of that hands-on, right, in a few minutes. And then the access token. So this part up here is part of your request. And this part is for what comes back from the server. So basically your response. You get a preview here, your response headers, if there are any, and then the code snippets, the toolkit, and the adaptive card that I was talking about on the slide. This is here. Here is where you would see that. So again, there's a lot of documentation inbuilt into this page as well. So like here, when you see there are sample queries, say for instance, get my profile. I click on that, it shows up here. Or if I do get my profile beta, it changes and it shows up that query. So it's pretty easy to try out simple things. And then if I run that, it is actually going to give me back information. So when it says 200 or anything in the twos is mostly where it succeeded running the query. And it also gives the time in which the query ran or the time it took for the query to run. And then this is where you get your response preview, then your response headers. And these are all tabs that you can tab through. But let's go through this a little slowly here. So the first one is pretty simple, my profile, you just do a get, and this is where you have on the drop down, you have all those other methods that you can use. And then this drop down has the 1.0 or beta. So for instance, when I did my profile, it defaulted to 1.0 with this. But then if I did a beta here, if I ran this query, then it defaults to beta because that is specific to beta. And then it puts the query for me. But now, if you want to see the difference, I'm going to go back to this for a second. My profile, I run that again. I get back only this much information, right? That's it. However, as against that, same query, but in beta, that is not 1.0, but in beta, same query, I run that, I get a much longer list. So that means with 1.0, which is a production ready use case, that gives you only limited data. And I think that makes sense, right? Because you want to retrieve in your production applications, you want to retrieve only the data that you really need. With beta, it's more like, because you're playing around, you're exploring, you want to know everything that's out there. So they have a lot built into beta that it responds with. However, with just the 1.0, it gives you only what's necessary. And obviously, you can get all the other information as well with your query. So if you need information that's not displayed also out of the box, then you can query accordingly and still get everything that you need, like all these different elements of your JSON. So that's that. And I'll get more into the queries and stuff, but let's go back to this left side here. Now, like I said, these are some sample queries, and there are various examples of it, some getting started ones, some application related, there's batching, or let me go down here, something that makes more sense, teams related queries, or even OneDrive related queries. You can try all of this out. User related queries. If I run this and say, get me all users in the organization, click on that. It's going to get me all the users that I have in my Azure tenant. So users, and then there's also groups, which is another favorite one of mine, because it really makes it easy to see the different scenarios and how things change. List all the groups in my organization. I run that, and I get back all the groups that I have. And I'll show you how things are set up in my tenant as well, just to compare what we get back. But let me complete this overview. So sample queries are really limited. Microsoft has provided us just with some basic stuff, so you can play around when you're just getting started. But you want to also tap into all or most of the resources that are available, right? So that's what you would find in this tab, the resources tab, which basically has almost everything that Graph can pull. So this is where you would find information for anything that you're looking for that you wouldn't find in the sample queries, or you can actually explore stuff here and use that for your query creation and basically to build your apps. Now here, you can also switch to beta. This is just the limited 1.0, but if you switch to beta, and we'll take an example of the admin here, so which actually shows like 6 commands or 6 resources. If I switch to beta, oh, that hasn't changed. Okay, so that doesn't change. Possibly that probably has the same for beta as well as 1.0. But if you see, we got 3 other new ones in here, which basically are not available in the 1.0. So that's where it makes the difference. You get a much longer list of things or resources to play around with or to use when you are using the beta. But again, you should only be leveraging that for your dev tenants or test tenants. One of the other things that you can do right here in resources is, you see this plus sign. It actually helps you add these resources to collections. So I can add either the whole admin stack, or I can only pick one. This I probably already added. Oh, I think I added almost everything. So let me delete that real quick. All right. So if I go to people, say I add this to the collection, I go to profile card properties, add these two. So that gets collected here. If I preview that collection, it shows me everything that I just added. And basically, I can download that and use that in Postman. So that's where that is helpful. If you really want to do some complex querying, but you do want to take your data or you do want to take your resources from the Explorer, then you could pull that into your Postman collection and then use that collection in Postman. So that's where that helps. And of course, you can remove and get rid of your collection as well. The history tab is also very important. Maybe people don't find it, as util because they haven't tried it. But if you really look here, it shows everything that I have tried today, things that I have actually, the queries that I ran today. So if you are, say, kind of working on something today and you remember a query that you ran yesterday in Graph Explorer, and you were like, oh, I wish I could go back to that query and see what request body I put or what responses it gave, you can actually do that. It is all saved here. So shows you everything that you've done. And you can go back to that actual query. If you just click on it, it shows everything that you've done as far as that query goes. So that's where history comes in. And it's really helpful as well, I think. One of the other things I wanted to show on the sample queries is these little things here on the left, where it's like a page icon. So if you click on that, say, for instance, my photo, get my photo. If I click on that, it takes me to the actual resource documentation. And I think that's helpful because you can directly go and read if you have a doubt or a question, and you don't have to go search on Google and then get to the page. Just a time saver. So all of these have documentation imbibed right next to it. And so are these things. So for instance, again, if I run, say, my profile is a good example, I'll run that. And if you look here, code snippets, for instance, it gives you code snippets for all these different programming languages. I just tap through those so you can see, if you're writing an application in JavaScript, you quickly grab this, put it in your app or your code. It really comes in handy to just plug it in right from here. So you actually don't have to go look for what module should I use, what query should I use, what syntax. But then if you look here, all of these also have such links to the SDKs. So like I said, there's a lot of documentation inbuilt right around things in the Explorer itself to save you time. So it's just that you have to look for it and be aware of it, basically, and use it for your benefit. Like even here, open this example in the Graph Toolkit playground. This takes you directly to the Graph Toolkit. So that kind of helps. And these are the adaptive cards. As I mentioned, it shows you cards, say you're building a bot or something, you can use something like this. There's also a JSON template that comes. And again, some more links here. So it has really good documentation implemented. All right, so with that overview, let's try and run some queries here. And I'm going to do with getting started. And my profile we already ran. We saw it gives back all this information. And I'll quickly run to Azure. Users. And that's the account right here that I'm logged in with. I am a global admin, logged in as a global admin to Graph Explorer, as in with that consent. So here is my information, all the properties, and this is what it returns when we run this. Now, if I want to do my photo, for instance, run that, it's going to show me the picture, the profile picture that I have. Same thing that I have here, so it pulls the right kind of information. That's how it helps. And looking at the query for a minute, we have a dollar value here towards the end. And that's basically, telling Graph Explorer that I don't care about the metadata, but I do want the picture itself. However, if you remove that and you run the query again, it's actually going to come back with the metadata instead of the image itself. So this is where you would manipulate your queries. going to run that again. And then let's see. So we can do more. I can also do, say, my profile. And say I don't want all this information. I want to use a parameter. Say I want to use like select, because I don't want all these different elements. I only want my display name, for instance. So what I'm going to do here is, something like this, and it prompts you with what you could do next. So you can use that. And then I say display name, again, it's prompting me, and with just this, it'll actually give me just the display name. I can also add like, a job title. So if I say job title, that's where it gives me my display name as well as my job title. And then if we look back in Azure, properties, my job title. So right there, it's pulling data straight from Azure or from your M365 platform. And it's quite real time, I would say. Then I could also do something like, a filter, for instance. Now, I may not be able to do that directly in, me, but I can do that for like a users. Say I want to filter out on maybe a display name of a user that has a different name. So I can do something like filter and maybe display name. Trying to think of an example here. Okay, let me try that. Okay, it did. So I filtered on users. You see how I removed me from there, because now we are really not leveraging this my profile query, which is a sample built-in query. We actually use that space to create our own query. So, I just said users because I wanted to look at all the users and then filter out by display name for a user called AKKI, which actually is one of the users here. So if we look, the first user in here, this one, that is what it pulled because I asked for it. Okay, so that way it's useful. You can put in your different properties or your different parameters and do what you need to just by modifying the queries. Now, one of the other things you can do is, say, for instance, I click back on my profile and I do this. Say I want to get my information with a unique ID instead of doing like a me or a simple query like that. Now this is my ID, and I'm going to actually use that to feed it back to it. So kind of similarly, I'm going to ask it to look for all the users and then put that ID in there. And now when I run that, it should actually give me this information again because I'm looking for myself just from the user's view. So that's what it did, same information again. So we're kind of modifying the query in my profile, but like I said, we can actually go to the users section down here and kind of look for similar things in here. So users, now what we can do is say count the users in your tenant excluding guests. So I'm going to run that query. Maybe it's too small to view, but it's 4 that it returned. It also said that the query ran successfully because, again, it gave me a 200 status. So number 4 is what we get back for the number of users in my tenant, excluding guests. So let's see. I go here. If you see, there are 5 users, but then one of them is a guest. And that's why it did not count that. It gave me these 4. I can get my direct reports. If I run that query, it actually comes back with a blank value. And the main reason for that is I am not really assigned as a manager to any user in that tenant. most users are distinct in there. I actually have a manager or employee relation, but I'll show that in another example. So this is a blank response where it has a blank value because I don't really have any direct reports in the tenant. And then all users, I think we already ran this. We kind of saw how it shows all the different users, Jane, I have John, I have myself, I have Sue, all of those users that we just saw in the tenant, and all guest users. We could try that as well. We just have one guest user like we saw, which is John. So that's what it came back with. So that's how it helps. Now, there is another parameter that you can use, which is like top 2, top 5, something that you would also use in SQL, for instance. So we can do, something like get me just the top 2 users. So what I can do here is maybe something like this, say just top 2. So it actually gave me back just 2 results, 2 users. And I think it's quite alphabetical. That's why you see these 2 users. So that's kind of where your parameters come into play. You can do different things. You can create your own queries as against using these sample ones, but definitely there's a lot to play around with here. Now let's do one thing. I am going to add a new guest user. So let's see. I can actually add one here. So let's do that. Let me add a new user here, and then we'll go back and see our responses. So a new user, I'm just going to call Dawn. Auto-generate password, that's fine. Dawn again. Dawn with the last name of a D. And let me add them as a guest user. I'm not going to fill out any other information. We don't really need that. Create the user. It takes a while to refresh sometimes, so we may have to do this a couple times. Okay, there is our user Dawn. So now if we go run our all guest users in the org, we are probably going to see John as well as Dawn that we just added. So see how real time that is. That's where it really comes in handy, where you can quickly look for things. Now, I also want to show you how things work in the developer tools, like how you actually see what API it is calling in the developer tools itself. So if we go here, say more tools. Okay. Let me run something again. I'm just going to say same thing. Yep. So see how it shows graph.microsoft.com. It is calling the Graph API. Similarly, you can see the same thing in Azure. So for instance, I'm going to open developer tools here also. And I'm going to just maybe open up a user. That's a lot of data. But if you look here also, it is calling the Graph API. So all of these portals, the Azure portal, your Entra portal, your Intune portal, they talk to the graph. So that's kind of where you can see it and see it in action, basically. All right. So since we were in Azure, let me show you one other thing. I mentioned app registrations, and for the tokens, for the consent, for your application, or even for the Graph Explorer to be able to access and do stuff using the Graph API in your tenants, permissions are needed. So one of the things you would do as part of that is registering that application. So say you actually have developed an application called a test app, which is going to be using Graph. You will actually have to register your application here, and then you really wouldn't see a Graph Explorer registration here because that's not something you would deliberately go and do. But you definitely see it in your enterprise applications. Graph Explorer is listed as a registered app because at the end of the day, it is also an app that needs permissions to be able to access data. So the first step in doing that, for your Graph Explorer or for your custom application that you will be building, you have to register it. And then there's a kind of a few different steps that you need to do as part of the whole process. You probably need to set up a service principal, but there's a process to actually make your custom app work properly with leveraging Graph. And the app registration or the enterprise app is just the first step in that process. But as far as Graph Explorer goes, it gets created by itself. You don't have to do anything. And that's the beauty of it. You don't have to really be too much involved into doing things like this when using the Graph Explorer. One of the other things I can show here real quick is, say, all users in the organization. I wanted to show better adaptive cards. Yeah, I think this one is good. So let me expand that a little bit. So see how you see good adaptive cards here for different users based on the information that we've provided in Azure itself for those. But this gives a good idea of how things would look like. And then again, we have the code snippets. Get MG user. That's the one you will use for PowerShell. Yeah, I'm more of a PowerShell person than any others. So that's where I incline to. All right, so then with that, let's move to the most interesting section, which is going to be trying out all of these methods. All right, so for that, I'm going to use groups because that's where we'll get to play around with things more. Now, we already tried get, right, which is all these are mainly related to getting information or pulling information. You fetch data from your tenant. So that's get, and that kind of gives you what we've already looked at. But let's try post. Now, post, as I mentioned, is more like, creating something new. So let's try and do maybe create a new group. And again, as you see here, we do have a post example here that you can use. But if there were not one, you could still type in your own query, and then you just select the right method from the drop down. You could have done that easily. So that works. Now let me first do create a new group. All right. Why did we get an error, right? So if you look here, what it says is, and basically this will turn red if you get an error, and it'll be in the 400s, mostly for errors or things like where there's a mismatch or a bad request. So this is a 400 error. It says that another object with the same value already exists. Now, if you noticed, let me click out of this. So when I clicked on create a new group, it already had a sample here for the request body. And I immediately ran the query. Now, this I may have run previously, and I'm pretty sure there's already a group in my tenant with the same information. And that's why it is telling me that there's another object of the same value. If you really wanted to create something of your own, on this sample, you can modify the data and then do that. So we'll do that. But before that, let's go and just confirm. So I go in here in my groups. I do have that group. So library assist is a group that I had created previously, and that's why it did not like it. Now, what I can do instead is maybe I don't want a library assist. I want a library assist 2. Now, let's see what it does. Now it was able to create because there is no mismatch. And now it gives me a status message in the 200s, which means a success, or the green ribbon here. So it actually created that library assist 2 group for me with the post, because post is where we would use to create new items, right? So let's go back, look here. There is my library assist 2. So that's how that works. Another thing I can show you is in here. This is a good example of a header, right? Where the request body and the headers were kind of pre-built for you to try out. So I didn't have to specifically do anything in here other than, changing information here if I needed it. But this is a good example of a header which actually puts more information or metadata along with your request body, specifically telling it about the content type. Your content type is JSON. You're telling it to create a group with this JSON feed. So that's where these kind of things come into picture. Now, so that was post. Let's try a simple one first, and then we'll get into the more complex stuff. Let's try delete. What I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the same group that we just created, which is actually our library assist 2. So let's do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the ID of this group. I'm going to go to the delete group query, because we have it pre-built, so we don't need to actually fabricate it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that group ID in here. So I'm actually telling it to delete that library assist 2 group that we just created. So let's see what it does. All right, we get another error. Why did we get that error? Now this one is a 403. Again, a red line tells us that something is wrong. It says forbidden 403. Either the signed in user does not have sufficient privileges, or you need to consent to one of the permissions on the modify permissions tab. This is what I was talking about. There are granular permissions built into the Graph Explorer, and there are going to be times when you try to run something, it gives you a bad response back, it fails on you. Authorization request denied, or something where it says the user doesn't have sufficient privileges. At that point in time, you go to modify permissions. And in this example, there is just one line item, but there may be a few different ones to which you may have to consent. So what you would do is you would actually hit consent, and it's going to pop up with a screen where it'll ask you to validate certain things. You could also consent on the behalf of your organization, which means you are actually expanding the scope, for things to be access in your tenant. Again, if you are, admin level, you could do that. I'm just going to say accept here. Now, as soon as I consent myself, it turns the ribbon green, but that doesn't mean that we have gotten our response, right? So what we still need to do here is run that again. And now it actually ran. It gave me a 204 with blank content. Blank content doesn't mean that it failed. It actually ran. And just because it deleted something, it couldn't get me back anything. So that's why it comes back as blank. So if we look, I also wanted to show you the token here before and after. But anyway, I'll just show you how the token looks at this point in time, now that we have consented to group rewrite all. So if we look, this is the token, which is quite not readable. However, you can either copy it from here and put it in a readable format, or you can click on this, which takes you to the JOT display. And here you can see that right here down on the scope, these are all the permissions that I had already granted myself to. But what we just added was this. And that's why you see that appended to the token at this point in time. So this is where you will see all the permissions that you already have granted yourself, doing things over a period of time in Graph Explorer. But this is basically the token that it's going to use, your Explorer session is going to use. And it actually says that this token is valid for the Graph Explorer on behalf of Sucheta. That's me. So this is basically your token, and JOT tokens are signed, so they are a good secure method. But this is kind of the token that you can actually take a look at. I'm going to close that. Go back here. All right. So also in Azure, now that we have deleted the group, let's go back, look in Azure. I'm going to refresh here. This library assist 2 will go away. Yep, that's gone. So it did delete our entry. We just had to consent. And I think that was a good example of consent there. All right, moving on from delete, let's try patch. Now for patch, I'm going to take an example of, say, all users in the organization. Let me go back to users. All right, so I may want to, let's actually look at Azure first. So let me go to users. All right, I will try and manipulate this user. So we have Jane as a user who is in HR. Let's open that up. Look at the properties. So Jane is supposed to be in HR, but she's an architect, job title. That doesn't sound quite right. I want to change that. She is also part of a group, which I will show you right here. She's also part of a group, which is C-suite people. Jane is a member of that. So let's make her an HR VP. Okay. So going back to Jane's properties, where she currently shows HR or architect as a job title, let's change her job title to, say, HR VP. And that's what we'll do with patch command, because patch is what will help us to modify an existing entity. So let me go back here. And I'm going to say, get me all users in the organization. All right. So I get all the users. Now I'm here because I want to look for Jane's ID, because I'm going to try that by her ID. Now this is Jane's ID. And what I can do is, there should be update user right here. All right. So I want to patch or update the user. So I'm going to put her ID in here. And instead of department, what I want is her job title to be changed. So I'm just going to copy this stuff, use that in my request body, and make her HR VP. I have double quotes. Okay. Now this should work, and no content, it really doesn't have anything to give us back because it just took the information that we gave it. So now HR VP should be Jane's new job title. Let's see. She shows architect. I'm going to refresh. It does take a while. Tests your patience sometimes. Okay, I'm going to go out of there, come back in, properties. Yep, now she shows HRVP. So that was the patch. So basically you update a resource with new values, but like any attributes that you want to change or update, one or a few, it still works that way. So that was patch. Now we are left with put. And put, like I said, is a little bit involved. It is where you actually are not just updating the value of an entity, but you're updating the entity itself. That's kind of a complete replace, or you're you're overwriting the data that's already there. So I'm going to try that in another tenant of mine, which is a little more simple because I want to try that in OneDrive. All right, so I am logged in here with my other tenant or other account, and I go to OneDrive. So for instance, here I say, list all the items in my OneDrive. And it's going to show me the files that I have, which are actually these files. What I want to do with put is replace the contents of this test file or a text file. Let's look at the file first before we do that. So this file has some test content, some gibberish here that I tried to put for the demo, but we are going to replace this text. So let's go back, leave OneDrive as is, go to Explorer. And here what you can do is say, I just want to change it to say put. I'm deliberately choosing that because if you look on the left, I don't really have an example to go off of. So I'm going to say, remove that. And I need to actually give it the path to my file. So I'm going to say maybe root, my test file. Now I don't have a path because my file is actually on the root or at the root. And I'm going to say content of the file. So I'm telling it that this is my test file at the root. I want to change the content. And I need to give it to the content that I want it to overwrite with. So I'm going to say, something like come cloud with us. Good example, right? All right, so let's run that query. And it did it. So if you look, gave me back a 200 with a green ribbon, means it ran it successfully. And now if I go here, I'm going to refresh that real quick. And if we look at the file, it has
Actually, we're not seeing your screen, right? We're not seeing your second screen.
Oh, you didn't see this?
Yeah.
Okay, I can try that again. You stop sharing for a minute. Okay, yeah, thanks for telling me that. Okay, I think it's not able to see because I have that on my other tab. So let me pull that information over to my current tab. So give me a minute here. Okay, almost getting there. All right, I'm just trying to sign in with the right accounts. I actually have the OneDrive stuff I was showing was on a different account and a different tenant. So, okay, now we should be good. So let me share again. Okay, is that visible now? My OneDrive?
Yeah. All set.
Okay, thank you. All right, so, yep. So this is what I was trying to show for put. And if we look now, actually, I'll have to revert the changes, or we can just do something else. Now, I was trying to show you how we can put using the put method and actually modify contents of a text file. Now, that text file I have is on my OneDrive, which is this, the testfile.txt. And if you look at its contents, it says, come cloud with us. We're going to modify that. So going back on my tenant, now what I really want to do here is I want to modify the OneDrive file. So I'm going to go down here to OneDrive and list items in my OneDrive. Just going to run that for a minute here. So what we do need to do is, we need to give the path of that file, the file that I want to change. So I'm going to say test file. That's the test file on my OneDrive.txt. And then I want to change its content. So I'm going to say content. But we do want to give in the request body the new content that we intend to. So I'm going to say come cloud with us again, because I already used come cloud with us. So we should see new content with the word again in the text file now after we run this. So I'm going to run that query. Okay, something went wrong here. So give me 1 minute. I want to log off from my other tenant real quick. It kind of has a problem sometimes if you're logged in with 2 different accounts. I'm going to try and refresh that. Demo gods, right? It's always like that. Okay, going back to my OneDrive.
I always joke and say I have an identity management issue. So.
That's a good way to put it, right? Yeah, I like that. I have an identity management issue. I'm going to use that at my work as well. It's easy.
Perfect.
All right, so let's see. Put new content in my test file.txt. Okay, I'm going to say good luck here now this time, hoping that it works with that. Oh, I haven't signed in. Wow. Okay, so that's not going to work. So give me 1 second. I think it signed me out of everything. I'm going to use another account. So this one. Good luck did not help. Okay, let's see if it works now. That worked. This works. Remember that for your demo gods. All right, so with that, it should actually have updated the file. So I'm going to refresh here. Open up the test file. It does show that content. So yes, it did update. So that's where, or that's how, you can use these different methods to do things in here and manipulate data or, build complex queries. And I also wanted to show towards the end how if you sign out, we have like a few minutes left and I'm almost done here, but let's finish up. So even if you sign out, and I'm going to refresh, like if you didn't sign in to the Graph Explorer, you can still use it with sample data, because now if you see, I am not signed in. It shows it's a tenant, a sample tenant, and it still has all these sample queries. If I see my profile and I run that, it actually gives some sample data of, say, someone named Megan Bowen, and then the photo, that's a good identifier. So like this profile has a profile picture of this lady, which it shows as sample data. And it also tells you here, you are currently using a sample account, and then you can sign in to access your own data. So you can still try out things in here just by going to aka.ms/ge and try out Graph Explorer. There's nothing stopping you. You don't even need to sign in. And that's kind of the beauty of it. All right, so with that, I do have a couple other slides that I want to finish up, but let me, just so we don't get into problems here again, stop sharing for a minute and then share again. So I will do that right in a minute. All right, able to see my slides? Okay. So you see the resources slide, right?
Yeah, we do.
Yep.
Okay. And this is basically the resources that I want to quickly talk about. These are resources that come in handy or helpful to you as developers or even to admins to assist you with your exploration of graph and with building solutions. So basically, the graph toolkit, which for instance is a collection of web components or authentication providers. You can use that when you are actually trying to build your applications. But the first one here, which is the developer tenant, is what I wanted to also demo, but we are short of time. However, the developer tenant is basically where Microsoft offers a free tenant. It's like an M365 E5 instance sandbox environment. It is pre-configured with sample data to start developing on the M365 platform. And you can be your own administrator in the tenant and prototype apps and solutions. So it's like a sandbox subscription. So it also includes a 25 user license for development purposes and comes with some sample user data as well. So that's really helpful, the developer tenant. Quickly talking about the graph tutorials. So the graph tutorials are step-by-step training exercises that guide through creating a basic application that accesses data via graph. It is designed to be completed within 30 minutes per what Microsoft says. So those would be good for trying out creating applications. So I think that's helpful for developers. Then here's the link to the Graph PowerShell SDK. And what you can do in Graph Explorer, you can do from PowerShell as well. The RESTful interface can be called from PowerShell. Graph PowerShell SDK is available, and based on the Graph API, you start with kind of installing the required modules for Graph and then go from there. The link has more information on that. And then towards the bottom, what I have is more of like community influenced or open source projects. And Graph X-Ray is a good browser extension. It lets you view the Graph API and PowerShell log of actions that you would take in the Entra ID or in the Intune portal. So like you can go from Azure portal actions to Graph PowerShell real quick, because it kind of reflects the PowerShell code as you walk through things in the portal. So it's I find it very useful to quickly grab the PowerShell code snippets. And then we have the Graph Permission Explorer, which this is helpful because you can click on a permission to view the APIs that are enabled and the data objects exposed to the calling application. It's kind of a reverse of what the official Microsoft documentation would give you. Here you can actually look up by the consent or by permission to see which APIs the permissions are about and what data it's about, and so on. So yeah, I would encourage you to check out these tools and use them for your benefit. And we'll probably put this in the chat here for you guys. And then lastly, where do you go from here, or how can you expand upon this knowledge or whatever information you gained from this session? So basically, leveraging the graph and Graph Explorer, you can actually do that as a developer or as an admin. So if you do want to understand these topics further, the MS600, which is a learning path series from Microsoft, it is the best path to follow because it does talk about the graph and the Explorer and all those related things. So that there's good documentation around the graph in general on this learning path. So you can read that and get some more insights into graph. And of course, you do want to keep an eye to to things that change, because keep an eye out for enhancements, I would say, pertaining to Graph and Explorer, because things keep developing and changing frequently. So we need to be on our toes. So yeah, I think, I mean, that's really all that I intended to demonstrate today. I hope this was of help and help to our viewers today, and also that you enjoyed watching it and you learned something new. So with that, I think, I'm good.
Awesome.
Right on time.
Awesome.
Any questions?
So I don't see any questions, but you mentioned something. So, and if you don't mind,
Sure.
I know you shared this great long list of resources.
Yes.
One thing I'd recommend that we add to it. There's a Microsoft Graph changelog. One of the things that I follow. It's actually pretty awesome. Kind of breaks it down into sections of like what's the recent changes, what section of graph it kind of breaks it into, or what's affected. But let's put that link out here too.
Yep. Yeah, that's definitely another helpful one.
This one is what we're talking about. But yeah, it's really nice because it goes through that, as you were presenting and demoing, showed like versions, whether it's beta or version 1 or whatever else.
Exactly.
Yeah, it breaks it all out. It's searchable. There's a lot, but at least where it's pretty well documented, it gives that info. So, but yeah,
Yep,
great
I
session,
agree.
fantastic share. So. So I don't see any other questions from our audience. We'll just give a couple of minutes here. I know we still have a few people tuned in, but please, if there's any questions, speak up. Thank you again. This has been the depth and just coverage of Graph in general has been awesome. So really nice to see. Thank you.
Yeah, glad to hear that. Thank you.
I'll buy a little bit more time. So one of the things that I toyed with, I was saying to Abdul in the background, like near and dear to my heart, you're talking device management, configuration manager, and Intune, and I too get to dabble in a bunch of these areas. And one of the things that I was toying with was basically the driver abilities. So you can reach out to the device and run the scan, set up your groups using Windows Update
Exactly.
for Business or whatever it may be called this week. but it's pretty slick to kind of just go out and see that. Not necessarily using the UI, but as a representation that I can report on and say, here's all the devices that are in, this group or this, specific update group. So pretty slick.
Yep.
All right. Abdul, any final thoughts? Any questions from your perspective?
No, this was a great session. Thank you so much for doing that. I don't see any questions in the chat. So with that being said, thank you so much. Hopefully we'll have you again. Thank you so much for your time. And hopefully the folks enjoyed the session. Definitely great detailed demo.
Thank you.
Yeah, with that being said, thanks everybody. Have a good night, good evening.
Thank you all. Happy learning.
Here.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks. Bye.